Hey, you guys. Happy Monday. Happy June 1st. We have made it halfway through what has been a very challenging year. I won't say one of the most challenging years because, if you look through the history of our country, there have been other pandemics. There have been um, much more intense race relations happening. Um, Not to make small or light of anything that's happening right now. Um, but this is a systemic pattern in our country that tends to pop up um, every and rear its ugly head at a massive scale every few years, and that has happened. And so the last couple of days, I really have been going back and forth about what would today's power lunch be about, because I didn't want to ignore what was happening in our country, but I also am exhausted from talking about it. I'm exhausted from watching the videos and the news. And when I say I'm exhausted, it's not like there was a meme I'm not exhausted to be black. To be black is beautiful. I'm exhausted at watching the mistreatment of individuals. And I'm exhausted with watching the back and forth of just comments of no substance or very little substance. And so I called this Mindset Monday because I wanted to talk to people who went back to work today. Because a lot of people went back to work today, whether you're working from home or you're actually in the office or you're on Zoom calls with coworkers, and especially African Americans who work in predominantly white environments. Um, it, it, Today's not a comfortable day. Today is an interesting Mindset Monday day because of what's happening in our community throughout the country, and it's not just on our side; it's on the Caucasian side as well, because everyone is watching the news. But of course, it's hitting us heavier because it is happening in our community, and so our feelings about it are more vested. And we see George Floyd, and we see that could have been our husband, our son, our brother, our uncle, our cousin, somebody on the block that we were close to. And so immediately he becomes very human to us. I saw pictures of him holding a young relative, and I saw his family, and you realized how much he was loved. And that's the sad thing about so many of these people that have lost their lives, young and old, is we forget all of the people that they're connected to. And shout out to my friend Rakaya Gibson. Her son passed away from sudden cardiac arrest, and one of her initiatives is to bring hope and light through people grieving. And then I have another client out of South Carolina who also lost her son due to a car accident. And he was home on military leave, and she is working on something to help the entire family unit, because when someone is lost, the entire family grieves. And so when I said, we want to talk about it, but we don't want to talk about it, that is the truth. And so the best way that I could wrap my mind around this was a few years ago, my godson passed away in a car accident. Just brilliant, beautiful young man. He lived with my family for his senior year of high school because his mom left the state. So Wesley and myself and our children were really close to him. So as you can imagine, if she left her child with me, this is one of my absolute closest friends. And so he passed. We don't know if he fell asleep behind a wheel. We don't know what happened. It was the middle of the night, but he hit a guardrail and he died immediately. And so I remember walking through that with her and helping her with funeral arrangements and helping her the day of the service and making sure that she was okay after, and working with the funeral directors and making sure, I had the life insurance policy in my hand, and just doing whatever I could to be of help without causing her to have to comfort me through her pain. And so the reason I use that as an example is because that's what tends to happen. There's a lot of shame and pain and guilt that happens from white people during this time. And just based on how Black people are wired and how people are wired who are on the other side of that, we tend to have a tendency to say, oh, it's okay, or oh, this should, and because we're trying to placate or allow that person not to work through the guilt and the shame that they're feeling. And so even though our pain is much larger, and it's human nature. It's not something I don't even think people do it on purpose. What's your first instinct if someone tells you, that they lost a loved one? It's like, how are you feeling? I'm sorry. They feel terrible. Don't ask how you're feeling. I don't ask how you're feeling. I ask, what can I do? I say that I'm sorry and that I love you and I'm praying and I'm here and I show up if possible. And if I can't show up in person, I show up in some token of love. I show up through just checking in on a regular basis to just say, I'm here. I love you. Whenever you're ready, if you ever become ready, I'm here. Like that is the most gracious thing you can do, because nobody wants to feel like they need to comfort someone else in the midst of their own grief. And right now, African Americans are grieving. They're grieving for George Floyd, whether they knew him or not. They're grieving for Ahmaud, whether they knew him or not. They're grieving for all of the people who have died due to COVID. They're grieving due to Black on Black crime. They're grieving due to what's happening in our communities and in our education system. They're grieving due to the health disparities that had a light shined on them so brightly due to COVID-19. There are so many reasons to grieve. And then we already know in marginalized communities that the socioeconomic status can be all over the place. And so they may be grieving because they can't feed their children or put clothes on their backs. I don't know about everybody else, but my kids switched shoe sizes and clothes sizes while being in these houses this last couple of months. At the same time, for some, I know that their finances are not the same. So now you have kids that need shoes and need clothes, and you got furloughed or you got laid off or unemployment still hasn't come through yet. And you're trying to figure out how to pay the bills. Because my husband went live with me yesterday and he talked about it from a Black man's perspective. And he said, regardless of how I feel, how angry I am, how I've been treated, I have to go to work tomorrow because I have a family to take care of. And I have a responsibility as a man to make sure that my family is okay. And I have to compartmentalize those feelings because I still have to go to work in my predominantly white work environment and perform up to the level of expectation that is necessary. Nobody's offering like FMLA, PTSD leave for Black people who have been impacted, who watched the video of Floyd or Ahmaud being murdered. It's like, it was the news. We saw it like you, get back to work. And there is trauma involved in seeing that. There is trauma. Everybody's mental health capacity and their capacity to handle the weight of things is different. Everyone internalizes things differently. And yes, I agree. It is an old, but it's a needed conversation. And I am not denying the need for the conversation. I have gotten calls, and I know some other girlfriends have too, from news outlets, from government agencies, from all kinds of people wanting to hear what a Black woman is feeling and what she has to say about what's happening. And the feedback is, amongst all of my colleagues I've talked to, is you don't need to talk to me. You don't need to talk to me. You need to talk to one another, because we are not the catalyst for this issue. We are not the ones who are perpetuating this problem. We're not the ones who are, we're not racist. Like, it's just, my husband said yesterday, racism is comprised of two things: ideology and power. And so we don't have the history of the ideology of racism, slavery, segregation. And then we straight up, I have a whole company called PowHER because I want women to understand the power that resonates on the inside of them and live in the full capacity of that. But at the end of the day, as a Black woman, I realize that I have the double indemnity, meaning like I'm Black and I'm a woman. So I have racism and sexism to contend with. So I'm all the way at the bottom of the ladder. And so, and one of the things that really propelled me to start the social architecture piece of our organization is because I wanted Black women to see that although that we are at the bottom of this human food chain in the United States of America and throughout the world, that there is still a power that resonates on the inside of you. It's your ancestors' power. It's your God-given power. It is the power that has allowed us to prosper and to move forward despite all of the atrocities that have been done to us and against us. And, you know, I was just watching this morning there on the there's so much happening in the United States, but I guess on May 27th in Toronto, there was a Black woman and allegedly she was pushed off a balcony by a police officer. The story is sketchy. I don't have all the facts, but there's like a Justice for Regis hashtag out there, and there's all type of news stories, and her cousin is live on video once again, shaken to the core, saying, I cannot believe the police just threw my young cousin out of a window. Guys, we need to mobilize. We need to be strategic. We don't need another initiative just to talk about it, but we have to figure out how we can be about it. What can we do? You know, if you watch the live, I know it was long and we went a couple of different directions, but if you fast forward to like the last 45 minutes of the live with my husband yesterday, we talked a lot about the generations before us and how they felt. And so I was putting some thought to that because, you think about my mother's generation and her parents were in the midst of segregation. And so the way that they raised her, my father, the way my husband's parents were raised was still on the fringes of that. And so I remember driving down south every summer and we always had to pull over to the side of the road to use the bathroom. And I thought it was the grossest thing in the world. And I was like, yo, it's rest stop. We done passed like 50 million rest stops. But, African Americans still had the mindset that something could happen to us at a rest stop, where we weren't allowed at certain rest stops. And we didn't know if we were in a sundown town, where that if you were Black in that town after the sun went down, it was a whole problem. And so that mindset was still there. Still their normal. And so then when you think about my grandparents' generation who lived in the midst of segregation, and they had the colored and white water fountains, and they had the segregated schools, and they lived in the rural South, and they put up with that and lived with that separate but equal law. That was their normal. And so for the cities to be burning, for the Pettus Street Bridge to be happening, for the bus boycotts to be happening, for the sit-ins to be happening, this was the news every single day as Blacks fought for the freedoms that we now enjoy. We free-ish. I saw a shirt that said free-ish. I don't think that we've quite came to the full fruition of Dr. King's dream. President Obama being elected for 2 terms definitely shows us progress. The more Black female CEOs we have, and Black male CEOs we have, and the more pieces of power and the further we move up the scale and pay rate, that's great. But equal pay day still falls different for Black women versus white women versus Hispanic women versus Asian women, meaning like the day that it takes us to make the same amount of money that it takes a white person to make in a year. A white woman in particular, if you want to just look at those statistics, but then if you look at white men, like it's way off. So I would just say also, so it is interesting watching who's looting and watching who's, I watched a whole video yesterday of like police brutality in these protests, and majority of the people that were being attacked were not people of color. And so I'm definitely appreciative of people of other colors and of white people who have locked arms and are standing with us during this. I'm so appreciative of that. But I would also say that I lost my train of thought with that. I've watched it, but I would also say that, there's some looting and some, there's just, my husband and I were reading a story about how there's just piles of bricks showing up places and how people are getting dropped off from other cities to create chaos in the midst of peaceful protests. And I'm not a conspiracy theorist, so I don't know how true all of this is. But my point in saying it is that before and I understand if it's your business and if it's the way that you provide for your family, I understand the anger that ensues with that and the devastation. I actually read an article about a Bangladesh restaurant in Minneapolis. I think Mine's posted that, or Sherry. Shout out to Team Elevation. And, he was saying, although his restaurant had gotten damaged through the protests, that he still stands with the protesters. Hopefully if you have a business, you have insurance. But also, like Dr. King said, rioting is the language of the unheard. And so, Colin Kaepernick tried to do this quietly by kneeling during the national anthem and was made a monster and lost his career due to trying to do a silent protest about police violence and the killing of Black men by police. And no one listened. Everyone judged. Everyone had something to say. And just imagine if people had went into action in the same way then when he took that knee, versus thinking he's anti-American. He doesn't love the flag. He doesn't love the anthem. If they would have taken the position of he is trying to use his influence and his platform and leverage his power to initiate change in a peaceful way, just imagine how much further we could have been these few years later. And perhaps things wouldn't be burning down right now. And perhaps streets wouldn't be shut down and highways wouldn't be shut down. And there wouldn't be fires all over cities and curfews being ensued. And then that's the last piece that I'll say. These young people that are out here, they have never dealt with anything like COVID. I mean, they don't even get the chicken pox based on these immunizations. They're not used to being locked in. They're not used to feeling locked down. They are so confused. Look, our government is fighting. They tell us to stay in to be safe. And then the Supreme Court overturns our governor in Wisconsin's decision to say, hey, screw y'all. They are being faced every day with family members and friends dying in the streets from gun violence, and their relatives dying from COVID. They're losing grandparents. They're losing so many people. And so they are trying to find yes, Jackie, they are courageous. They're trying to find their space in the world, and they're trying to find their voices and use them. When I was out this weekend in the middle of a protest with a lot of young people, the conversations that I tried to have was, man, please take this energy to the voting booths. Like, please go vote. Like, remember how you feel right now at election time, because it's truly, truly critical. And so to see them mobilizing in this way, and we know some of them, may be out without the full depth, breadth, and understanding of what's happening. They just see a crowd of their friends or people and opportunity. Wes and I, we rode past some young people yesterday. The police had the highway blocked on North Avenue. So if you live in Milwaukee, that's like a main street. Where North Avenue enters onto 43. Some young people that looked like they were under 25 parked their cars in the middle of that street, sat on the sunroof, sat on the roof, sat outside, doors open, and looking at the police like, I dare you. And Wes and I looked at each other and said, wouldn't have been me. At that age, they are not afraid of anything, Jamila. You're right. And some of them feel like they have nothing to lose, so they're doing what they know. That is profound. That is so profound. Because when you feel like you have nothing to lose, when you feel like the world doesn't want you anyway, look at the suicide statistics for our young people. Look at the loss due to violence of our young people. They feel like whether they do something right or do something wrong, they are concerned every time the police pull up behind them. And so they feel like, for some of them, it doesn't matter if I do right or if I do wrong, I could die anyway. So I might as well go out guns blazing. Now, I don't mean guns literally, but I mean like with the full depth and breadth of how they feel, and do something and say something. And yes, we there's only one real race, the human race. We need to love as God commanded. We had rioting all around last night, just about every direction within hours of my home, was hit with people breaking windows. What does this teach the next generation? So definitely understand, definitely agree. There's only one real race, the human race. But right now, there's a segment of the human race, the African-American segment of the human race, that feels under attack. And we typically feel under attack. And so what does the rioting teach the next generation? It is like I said last night, I am not an advocate of looting and burning and destroying property. So I'm not advocating for that at all. But I am an advocate of teaching our young people how to strategically mobilize and how to strategically have their voices be heard and how to organize in a correct manner. And so to you, Linnell, I apologize that, so here we go again. Now I gotta apologize for Black people, but I apologize that was happening by your home. But again, rioting is the voice of the unheard. And so these young people don't have a voice. They're hungry, they're tired, they're jobless. Some of them are homeless. If they do have a home, they live in environments that most of us could not even wrap their mind around. And you're right, Jamila, most of us have been feeling attacked since birth. And so that being said, these young people that are out looting and they are out expressing themselves, when we don't have the words, our emotions take over, and emotions are a powerful thing, and they can cause us to do things that we would not necessarily do when we're calm. And so I would say that I am in agreement, and I wish the whole world saw us as one race, the human race, but they don't. They just don't. They just don't. And so I would say show the young people some grace. Again, this is not something they've ever experienced. There are books that talk to this, but it's not like they're being taught activism in school. It's not like they're being taught how to organize properly at school. It's not like they have, and especially in the city of Milwaukee, you only have 50% of Black men graduating from high school. You have schools that are literally failing our kids, that are showing them that they don't have options. And then you wonder, why are they in streets setting cars? What else do they have to do? What else do they have to do? What else do they have to do? We don't know what their home situation is like. We don't know. We don't know. And you're right, Jackie. America has failed a segment of our population, and we need to apologize. We need to apologize to the young people. Absolutely. No one is taught activism. That's one of the things my husband, I call him Pastor Bay. Of course, he is an ordained minister, and, we are under the belief that eventually one day, he will pastor a church when, God tells him it's time. And those are the type of things that we do want to talk about in church. We think that there are so many things not being taught in the church. It's fire and we get it. We don't want to go to hell. And that's part of the Bible. That's part of the Bible. We're not going to negate that. But there are also, the Bible is an acronym for basic instructions for believers. Or no, basic instructions before leaving the earth is an acronym someone gave it. And so it's like, if these are basic instructions before leaving earth, if this is God's instruction manual for us, and in there, he talks about, Jesus was pulling together the multitude to share about love and peace and understanding to any and everybody who would listen. He would cause a ruckus in every city that he showed up in. He was the first, or one of the most famous organizers. Moses did a whole upheaval of freeing his people and marching them through. And so, these are stories that we've been told since we were a kid, and rooted in them are life lessons that we can use in our everyday lives on how to do things. And then if you study Dr. King and you read Letters from Birmingham, that's the other piece I would say too. Stop getting all your information from social media and CNN, and hopefully you don't watch MSNBC. But anyway, no shade, but all the shade. And start reading some books. And start listening to some TED Talks, and start listening to some thought leaders, and start surrounding yourself around some people that can really, really teach you. We have generation of kids born into poverty where you have to be extraordinary. Absolutely. And what is not said is drug addiction. Absolutely, drug addiction. And we have kids at home who are taking care of the home because they have drug addicted parents. And I mentor young women, young adult women in their 20s. still trying to heal from the trauma of that. There are so many mental health issues in our country as a whole. But then when you add on mental health issues in the African American community with the history of systemic racism, with the history of segregation, with the history of racism, with our slavery, with the history of how the court system does us, and with the history of murder and the way that drugs were brought into our communities, because we don't own no planes. And there's just so many things. There's so many things in the history of this country that should be paid attention to and that you should educate yourself around. And I promise you will have a lot more grace and a lot more gratitude and a lot more grit when things like this happen. So what I'll say again, and I said it, I think every single day, to my white friends and allies, because I have white friends who I love deeply and who love me deeply. I appreciate you using your voice, and I pray that you continue to use your voice to stand up and say something, because your influence is needed. You know who's racist in your family. You know who's racist in the workplace. You know when an inappropriate joke is made. You know when someone says something ignorant. When they say something, you say something back. When you see something, say something. You remember that happened after 9/11? Like, do something. Like, become the change you want to see in this world. You do it. Be courageous enough to say something, and not just post something, but in those private conversations, in those rooms that you're in that we are rarely invited into. And I speak from what I know. Remember, I was married to a white man for 8 years. My sons are biracial. I was in those rooms where they forget, oh, there's a Black woman in here. And I always said something. I always said something. I never sat back and acted like it was okay. I always said something, and my ex-husband always said something, because that is what you can do. You cannot sit back and act like it's okay. And you cannot sit back and allow them to shift in the uncomfortable of what they said. You have to say something, and you have to continue saying something until something changes. All right, you guys, I gotta go. I appreciate you all. Is it appropriate to call people by color? I call Asian Americans Asian Americans. I call Latino Latinos. I call Black people Black. I call white people white. I think it's okay. I mean, within the Asian American community, same as with the African community, there's Nigerians, there's Ghanaians, there's Liberians. In the Asian community, there's Vietnamese, there's Laos, there's Chinese, there's Japanese, there's Indian. There's so many people. So if you're gonna call somebody by their color, make sure you know what their color really is. So I think it's fine as long as you're calling them the right color. I mean, you don't want to call an Asian person Oriental. That is politically incorrect. Oriental is the description of things. So if you're going to start dabbling and calling people by their color, then make sure you understand what the appropriate thing is. And same with our LGBTQ plus community, who I love dearly. Make sure you know what to say. And if you don't know what to say, ask. Ask. What is the appropriate thing to say? We know not because we ask not. So ask. All right, I got to go for real, y'all. Bye. Have a good day. Peace, love, power. I'm out.